Hello, my name is Volodymyr and today I'm gonna talk about nuclear disaster in Chernobyl, Ukraine, that had place 3 decades ago. But now the ghost city begins its rebirth along with tourism development on this god-forgotten earth. First of all, I want to explain you more about nuclear power and how it works. The greenhouse gas emissions from nuclear fission power are much smaller than those associated with coal, oil, and gas, and the routine health risks are much smaller than those associated with coal. However, there is a catastrophic risk potential if containment fails, which in nuclear reactors can be brought about by overheated fuels melting and releasing large quantities of fission products into the environment. This potential risk could wipe out the benefits. The most long-lived radioactive waste, including spent nuclear fuel, must be contained and isolated from the environment for a long period of time. On the other side, spent nuclear fuel could be reused, yielding even more energy, and reducing the amount of waste to be contained. The public has been made sensitive to this risk, and there has been considerable public opposition to nuclear power. Perhaps the impact which is easiest to notice is the effect on the environment, particularly in terms of flora and fauna. To start with, the setting up of a nuclear plant requires a large area, preferably situated near a natural water body. This is usually accompanied with clearing of forest which disturb the natural habitat of several creatures and gradually upset the ecological balance of the region. Apart from this, studies have shown that due to the heat rejected into the water bodies, there have been significant drops in the population of several species of fish in certain regions of United States. Another significant effect is the increased amount of sulfur dioxide in the air which causes acid rain to form which then leads to contamination of surface water bodies of the region. Reduction of productivity of the soil and has several other negative effects on the region's vegetation and human health. When an explosion tore through Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl power plant in 1986, it was the worst nuclear accident the world had ever seen. Clouds of highly radioactive particles were released into the air during an attempted routine shutdown of the power plant north of Kiev in the former Soviet Union, now Ukraine. Now abandoned and overgrown, Pripyat still resembles a shattered snapshot of the typical Soviet city it once was. Visitors crunch through broken glass and sidestep bushes sprouting through corners of apartment blocks. Textbooks are strewn in empty classrooms and a cheap swimming pool lies empty beneath rotting wooden beams. Today, the number of tourists seeking to head deep into Chernobyl's exclusion zone, a 30-kilometer radius of contaminated land around the power plant, supports several tour firms. Fears regularly circulating about the fallout zone. Last year, it was contamination via forest fires, seemed to stoke just as much fascination, driving a steady stream of tourists. There are even hotels inside the exclusion zone. Visits are governed by security checks and by strictly guided tours. Visitors travel to the site, a 2-hour drive north of Ukrainian capital Kyiv, by tour bus. Wonders they sign a disclaimer warning against touching any objects or vegetation or even sitting on the ground. Leaving this site is also highly regulated. Body scanners test for high levels of radiation. If the scanner alarm sounds, guards sweep the individual for radioactive dust before they are allowed to leave. Also, Ukraine is not the only country which suffered from the consequences of this disaster. For example, one of the principal causes hindering a sustainable, ecologically safe process of social and economic development in the Republic of Belarus relates to the negative consequences of the Chernobyl disaster. These consequences affect all the main spheres of social activity both in the contaminated regions and in the Republic as a whole, and are a grave problem for Belarus. The nature and extent of the damage inflicted by the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power station have become destabilizing factors for the socio-economic advance of the Republic, characterized as they are by a drastic deterioration of the ecological situation and rise in morbidity levels. The problems brought about by the Chernobyl disaster involve changes in territorial structures relating to the use of natural resources, forced migration from contaminated regions, the depressed moral and psychological state of those affected, and the utter transformation of their whole way of life. Ukraine taught a lesson from this horrible disaster. Nowadays, most of Ukrainian nuclear power plants are frozen, and they are not operated. In conclusion, I want to say that Chernobyl is a good example of how people underestimate the nuclear power. I think that we, young generation, have to start to think about our future, about alternatives of nuclear power, about sustainable development of countries and cities, because only we can make this world great again.